Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm finally going to be covering my BT8 tier list. Usually I like to wait till close to the release, if not the release, of a brand new set, just because I want to try to cover as many decks as I possibly can on my channel, so that way if you're curious about any particular deck, then I should have a video for that. But regardless, I do my tier lists a little bit differently than what most people generally do. I only break my tier lists down into 3 categories, technically 2 categories, and my 3 categories are going to be what is going to be meta, what's rogue, and then everything else. So there's just a lot of playable decks in the game of Digimon, and a tier list to try to encompass everything is going to be a little bit harder to do. So I'm just going to condense everything down into these categories to just try to have a more focused idea on what the meta is actually going to be looking like. As far as breaking down my tier lists go, meta is exactly as it sounds. These are going to be the decks that are played in the most quantity and the decks that are going to have the best general performance. Then rogue decks are going to be decks that are still played, they're still meta playable, but they're not performing as well or played in as high of a quantity as the meta decks, and then everything else literally is just everything else. There's just too much to talk about in terms of various other niche decks that people could play or exist in the game that don't necessarily fall under those first 2 categories. But as far as what's on everyone's mind and to the meat and potatoes of the video, let's get into the meta. So as far as what the meta is going to look like, we have a pretty decent variety of decks that we could play that are going to have some relatively decent performance. So the first big one is going to be Yellow Hybrids. So Yellow Hybrids is a deck that's still around. It first came out in BT07 and it didn't necessarily have a good win condition and was really slow in BT07. As far as the changes that it got in BT08, well, it actually has a couple of offshoot and variants that you could think about playing. I just labeled them all as one because they're still all yellow hybrid decks. So as far as the offshoots and variants that you could play with yellow hybrids, you could either play yellow purple and kind of go more into the yellow purple synergies that came out not only with the starter deck but within the set as well. You could also go a little bit heavier onto the security control, splash in a different color for its hard removal options, and then you also have the third variant, which seems to be the more popular and powerful variant, which is going to be the Rapidmon variant. So the Rapidmon variant allows the deck to be a little bit more aggressive and still have lots of control tools available to it just because of the 2 color synergies that the deck is going to be playing around with. And Rapidmon is a very sticky body that's basically a mini Shine Greymon to be able to do lots of different things depending on the situation that you need it to do. But regardless, all of those variants just make Yellow Hybrids a really strong deck to consider just because it's still playing that control style of gameplay that it was known for. It just actually has more control tools and more different ways that you could approach the deck. Then, as far as the next big dog deck in the format, we're going to be looking at Imperial Digimon. So Imperial Digimon is basically a DNA Digivolution deck. The majority of the cards did come from the starter deck, but it does have some really good support in the set and a couple of different offshoots as well. The whole idea of the deck is to literally DNA Digivolve, so we have a whole bunch of DNA Digivolutions for this deck to try to take advantage of. So you could take advantage of Paildramon, you could take advantage of Dino Beamon, you could take advantage, if you wanted to, of Shikuamon and Chimeramon. So there's just lots of different DNA Digivolutions that you're trying to use, and then you're just going to go up into your Mega after you make a huge big power play with your level 5 DNA Digivolution. So that's kind of the whole idea of the deck. It is going to be more or less a low to the ground aggro style of deck that's just trying to get some good chip damage in, and then DNA Digivolve to extend some of your lines of play. Then, as far as the other big DNA Digivolution deck and the other big dog of the format, it's going to be the Mastimon deck. So the Mastimon deck is another DNA Digivolution deck. It almost plays kind of similar to Megazoo, where the idea is you're just trying to hard play your level 5s, line up a DNA Digivolution stack in Raising, so that way when you hard play a level 5, you could go right into Mastimon. And then once you go right into Mastimon, you're just basically going to take advantage of your on-play abilities off of your level 5s to be able to do various different things depending on the situation to kind of toolbox your way out of various situations, whether that's control, whether that's recovery, whether that's aggro, making her a very strong deck on top of the fact that you already are DNA Digivolving. There's yellow-purple support not only with the starter deck but in the set as well to make the deck very strong. But speaking of strong decks that are staying around, I actually think Blue Hybrids is still going to be a deck that's sticking around. Blue Hybrids has a couple of different variants that you could play it with. The more common one is just going to be the Azulong variant, where you're just going to be doing your classic Blue Hybrids thing, try to aggro with your level 4s and 5s, and then go into an Azulong casually or a Susanomon casually to just try to deal extra damage or close out games depending on your matchup. The one big thing to note is the fact that DNA Digivolutions and some various other counterattack, it does make the deck perform a little bit worse than it does, but against the vast majority of other decks, it's still a very strong deck and very annoying deck to play, just because the whole idea is you're going to try to use Tommy and Korikakumon and your hybrids to stunlock the opponent's Digimon so they can't do anything. Sure, DNA Digivolution does get around this just because it clears the Digimon of all of their debuffs, but not every deck is going to be DNA Digivolving to be able to do that, so Blue Hybrid still has its own place in the meta in terms of how strong it can perform and its overall play rate, so not a whole lot of people felt like it needed to change. But it does have the Gabubon variant in case you want to try to deal some extra damage to spice up the deck and have some variety in terms of what you could play within Blue Hybrids. But another strong contender for the meta is going to be the Black X Antibody deck. So Black X Antibody was pretty weak in BT07. It didn't really have a whole lot of tech and tools for it to use. It really just wanted to take advantage of all of the X Antibody synergies, which there wasn't a lot of because we only had one evolution line. In terms of what we actually got in BT08, we got a whole secondary evolution line to help flesh out the deck's consistency and its power and combo play. So with that whole second evolution line, it actually could create some really sticky bodies for a lot of decks to try to get around, and sometimes the decks might not even be able to get around. So Oriumon just not being able to be deleted is really, really powerful. You have Breath of the Gods, so it can't be bounced and you can't have its DP reduced, so you could just make this big stack and be able to actually keep that big stack, which is the problem with big stack decks is once it's made and it's tore down, then the deck kind of falls apart. The same thing is kind of true here, but it actually has built-in ways to try to protect itself. Dorugoromon is still going to be a really good card just because he can make himself bigger, so if he makes himself big enough, then he could try to dodge lots of removal that way. On top of the fact that the deck has various other protections, like trying to build up a decoy stack and having reboot and blocker, and more keywords to be playing around with. On top of the fact that you already have the Alphamon combo with Alphamon and Oriumon to have some extra punch and deal lots of damage while gaining lots of additional memory, all at the same time, and your Megas outside of Alphamon also can help remove and control the field, so it's going to be another really strong contender for the meta. But speaking of controlling the field and being a really strong deck for the meta, I actually think that Starman is going to be another really strong deck. This is a deck that has appeared all the way back in BT06, and it's still looking to be pretty strong just because the whole core aspect of basically utilizing Starman to play her for cheap or free is really strong, on top of Swiss Army knifing a whole bunch of removal option cards and various other option cards that cost 7 to be able to handle various different situations. The blue inclusion seems to be the more popular version just because there are some Digimon that can't just straight up be deleted, but regardless, when Digimon can't be deleted, that's why we're teching in blue to add some bounce elements into the deck to be able to at least have different ways to remove Digimon off the field. But her Swiss Army knife of 7 costed options make her a very desirable deck, on top of the fact that she's going to have a higher chance of having threats in the security, with some really good low to the ground aggro cards to use it to try to chip and deal lots of quick damage onto the opponent. And speaking of low to the ground chip style gameplay, we have Armor Rush. So Armor Rush is basically the new Rookie Rush 2.0. It's trying to take advantage of the Armor Purge ability to add some extra protection and resilience to their Digimon, and their Digimon can be relatively aggressive depending on your armor lineup. The more common variant is going to be the Vmon variant, where you're just going to use a whole line of Vmons to basically make it easier to digivolve into Flamedramon, Magnamon, and Ragermon to do their various different things. Flamedramon is going to be the aggressive card where you're just going to want to swing because he can make himself bigger. You're going to use Ragermon to try to help control the opponent's low-level Digimon that are going to try walling you out by suspending them, and then you could even beat them up if you so feel like it. And then you're going to use Magnamon as the big defensive card to try to wall the opponent out while you're trying to aggress. So that's kind of the whole core or idea on utilizing the Armor Rush, and then this deck actually does cap out with the ability to utilize various different DNA Digivolutions to deal more damage. So you could be like level 4 swing, level 4 swing, both of them lived. If they died, then you could just armor purge, re-digivolve, and then DNA Digivolve up right away. So it's another very strong contender and looking to be the premier aggro deck of the format. And then the last big meta-playable deck of the format is going to be the brand new Black War Greymon deck. So the new Black War Greymon deck is one of the few decks that actually has Tamer interactions. You do have some Tamer interactions with the Mastimon deck in the form of Zwart Defeat and the form of Lucimon Chaos Mode, but we have another Digimon to try to deal with the opponent's Tamers, which is putting hybrids a peg down and making them less desirable. Just because Black War Greymon getting up into him means that you could pop some Tamers, you could pop some Digimon. He's just a very mid-range style of deck that could be teched either to be more aggressively or more defensively and control-y. So he has lots of flexibility thanks to the Greymon engine, so you could use either a red base or a black base to do whatever you want, allowing him to have the freedom and accessibility of a lot of various different tools to be able to tackle various different situations. And then as far as your premier rogue decks go, we're going to still have a lot of decks that we've already seen and a couple of new ones. So Lord Nightmon and Jesmon are still going to be relatively playable. I think the inclusion of Chimeramon makes these decks more playable just because you have access to be able to free cast some level 4s to be able to line up easy DNA Digivolutions. I also think Chimeramon helps save Jesmon and keep him still meta playable just because even though with the savior limit down to 1, you still could tuck a savior underneath the Chimeramon and still have more access at that savior once you see him. So I think these two decks are going to be doing very, very similar, just trying to take advantage of the new Chimeramon card. Then as far as decks that are still going to be sticking around, we do have Lilith Loop, who actually is going to transition to Creepy Loop. So the Creepy Loop is doing something very similar to what Lilithmon is doing and what the Lilith Loop is doing, and they're using very similar tools. So you could basically either strip the deck out of the Lilithmon and go full Creepymon, or you could combine the two and just have two very similar loops in the same deck. That's just trying to take advantage of it being able to resummon your level 5s for free to go into a level 6, to go into your level 7, and kind of loop that whole thing from there to do various powerful things with. And then as far as decks that are still staying around, Cherubimon is still looking to be pretty good, just because he got a new support card. There's good yellow-purple synergies. You could line up some Jogresses and DNA Digivolutions with him. He's still just going to be a very flexible and versatile deck. And speaking of flexibility and versatility, we have the Machinedramon deck. So Machinedramon hasn't really changed a whole lot. He actually got a new Metal Greymon, thanks to the Black War Greymon support for him to be playing around with it to try to help control the opponent's field, and that's really the only big tool outside of just more red and black support as a whole. But speaking of various other red supports, we have red hybrids, which is still just going to be that big one-punch deck where you're trying to ideally line up your ancient play to just to easily go up into your ancient and then hit lots of the opponent's security relatively quickly and try to continue the pressure. I actually think the inclusion of Yoli, even though you won't be able to take advantage of her secondary ability to interact with two-color Digimon, although you could think about adding a two-color Digimon, there's just not one that I really think is needed for the deck. You just care about the fact that Yoli helps with the memory management of the deck, and then you also have the Gamamon-based cards that could help the deck with its draw engine. So you do have the new BT08 Gamamon that when you play a red Tamer, you get a draw card, which is going to be the majority of what you're trying to do anyway. And then you even have the new Gurimon. When a Digimon with 6,000 or more DP is attacking, then you get to draw a card. And draw inefficiency seemed to be what keeping back red hybrids before, so now that they actually have tools to help make that better, it's looking to be a little bit stronger. And then in terms of decks that are going to be getting a little bit stronger, we still have green hybrids. So green hybrids has a couple of different things that you could do with it. You could tech in a mono green package to better incorporate Rapidmon, because Rapidmon is just a stupid card in itself. And then the green hybrid package and engine still is really strong and really consistent, just because it could search out a lot of its parts and pieces. The only flaw to the deck is it doesn't have any good natural card draw outside of just your evolutions, but it's still a very strong deck to play with a whole bunch of variants. If you even wanted to, you could think about teching in Shivamon on top of the Rapidmon to have various different tools to try to burn the opponent's security and help control the field. And speaking of Shivamon, Shivamon has his own deck that you could try to build and focus on, where you're just trying to get up into Shivamon, have Shivamon be suspended in various different ways, so that way you could try to unsuspend him and then burn the opponent's security. The more Shivamons you have, the more powerful he is, and Shivamon is just really powerful in of himself because he could help shut off the opponent's options from being played. So most of the time you want to play this control style gameplay where you want to try to beat up the opponent's Digimon, get Shivamon and your other Digimon suspended, so that way you could reap the benefits of what Shivamon is trying to do on casually burn the opponent's security, so that way you can make your plays as safe as you possibly can. And then I kind of, for this last deck, cheated and have just Chimeramon, just because Chimeramon makes a lot of decks possible and a lot of decks viable. So similar to what we want to do with Lord Nightmon and Jesmon, any deck that could free play level 4s could take advantage of Chimeramon. And any deck that just wants to sit on their level 4s also can take advantage of Chimeramon to be able to line up some very easy DNA or Jagras plays to do very powerful things with. But for the most part, this is just my interpretation of what I think the meta is going to be looking like. And there's still even more to the meta than just what's on this tier list. These are just the big contenders. So there's a whole bunch of even more rogue and even more offbeat decks that can still perform relatively well depending on how you're built, what it is, and various other factors. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.